Okay, so we're starting with our last one, which is energy. And before I sort of launch into our acknowledgement, I want to just, we've always sort of put something into the acknowledgement that ties into what we've been doing. In this particular case, I selected a reading by Etienne Moustus-Laperty, who was reading the Grandfather's 7 Teachings, which also ties in the spiritual belief of the animals and the importance of those animals and what they represent, and ties into land learning and the whole piece. So if you have never read or are unfamiliar with the Grandfather's 7 Teachings, it's a beautiful short story. There's lots of different versions, and each nation will have a slightly different perspective on how they tell that story. So whether it's Cree or Anishinaabe or whichever you're looking at, Métis, they will have a different way of unpacking it. But the story behind it, basically the 7 teachings, are very similar. So it ties in well to some of the things that you're going to be talking about throughout, and I think you'll have places where that you can integrate it even more so if needed. So in a spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten.
The story of the 7.
Don't need you to come on now. Sorry. So as we were, I don't think that one got, well, it kind of did. It got it. It's movement that we're talking about, but movement in terms of movement of sound, movement of light is what we're going to be focusing on. And we really want to kind of unpack that in this case, we're going to unpack it from a sound perspective first, and then talk a little bit about light. Just because we also felt that we were struggling a little bit on coming up with a summative that would just always fit everything. These are big units or big components of each unit. So you might, depending again on how you structure your unit, you may wish to do them as an individual assessment, or you might want to do one large one again. So it'll depend on what your unit looks like and how you've got it put together. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who's going to take it away from here, and we'll come back when we've got resources.
Hi, everyone. I'm just want to just review the big picture a little bit more, and a little bit different maybe than the way we have in the past. We know this video may be viewed by people who are looking at science for the first time and may not have seen the other videos. So always a little bit of a clip in front just to help provide the big picture. The one you're seeing there, the big pictures, are not a bunch of trilobites or some kind of weird creatures. Those are actually silhouettes of grain silos. And they're there to act as a metaphor of, I think, our old teaching units. Those of you who taught grade 2 science last year or elementary science in the past know that the entire science course was broken down to topics. In this particular case, we have topics like buoyancy in boats or magnetism in grade 2. And we dealt with those ideas in that topic, and we moved on to the next topic. And it was only with purposeful planning and maybe sometimes some serendipitous occasions we'd be able to link through the other topics that we studied or other grades that we studied. But that took some purposeful planning and careful, exploration of resources. The new curriculum now, as we know, is not based on these individual silos. And if we can move to the next slide, Chris, we'll see that there's actually a lot of interchange of things in between those silos. They don't just stand alone. We have those 6 organizing ideas. Space is not included in grade 2, but we have those organizing ideas there, and there's things that flow in and out of them. And just what those things are, we've already covered in the past, so we won't spend too much time on that. But we know that one of the things that flows in and out that causes that connection between all those silos are the concepts and the understandings as well, but specifically the concepts. We see them appear and reappear in different organizing ideas in different grades. When we put those concepts together, that's when we start seeing really the big idea of what we're dealing with here. And that same is true for the organizing idea of energy. And I'll show you how the idea of energy is growing in the primary grades by looking at the next series of slides. In kindergarten, energy is looked at through the lens of movement, and that objects and animals move, and they move in different ways, and animals move for different reasons. And we unpack and look at movement through the definition provided by the grade 1 curriculum, is that movement is a change or in location or position. By the time we get to grade 1, we develop those ideas further, only adding on that when objects move, there are influencers that affect their movement in some way. As well, when we're talking about animals and objects and things moving, they don't not only move in different ways, but they move in different directions, and they have different pathways, and they move in different speeds. And that pathway is explored quite a bit. And that's sort of the linking ideas that come into grade 2 now, where we're focusing a little bit on the objects that move, and that is sound and light. But we know if you've taken a look at the curriculum already, or the organizing idea already, we're looking at sources of light and sound, and the behaviors of light and sound as they move and come into contact with certain objects. And finally, by the time we get to grade 3, we're talking about now things moving, and the idea of movement as a consequence of forces. And specifically, grade 3 takes a look at contact forces and how those forces cause and affect movement of objects. So you can see, once again, quite different than the other topical nature of the science course from the previous, or the older science course, to a more connected science course, not only within the grades, but throughout the grades. So more specifically for grade 2 energy, here's what we got here. It looks like a big complicated map once again, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through of it so you get a sense of what this organizing idea has for you. I'm focused looking at the center, where we see those red outlined boxes. We have light and sound, really, and there are some connecting words there, are too small for you to read on the screen, but you'll have an opportunity to download that. Light and sound does have movement. They're things that actually move, and they're movements that have a certain source, and that's where we get the gray box. So you'll see the right-hand side is the yellowy colored boxes, all relating to sound, and the bluish color is all related to light. So when we're looking at sound, we're looking at that sound has behaviors, and there's the 4 behaviors identified there. And when we take a look at light traveling, it will come into contact with objects, and those objects follow that down, have certain properties that affect. We follow the squiggly line. The properties of those objects that come into contact with sound affect the characteristics of sound at the top, such as the pitch, the duration, the loudness, but it also affects the behaviors. The properties of the objects affect the behaviors. It'll determine whether the light moves in a straight line, or transforms from one object to another. It bounces from that object, or stops inside another object, or something like that. When it comes to sound, we see a similar thing as well. We see that sound has certain sources, as does light, of course. Light also has certain behaviors which are identified there. The 4 there, they can go through objects, it can disperse, it can refract, and we're not going to use those big words necessarily with the students, but they're there, or it bounces off or reflects as well. Light also travels in a straight line from its source, and light has a certain pathway, and the objects that it comes into contact with can be human or natural, and again, those objects will determine the pathway of light. So generally speaking, that's what we're looking at with this organizing idea, is light and sound, how their pathways really are and their behaviors change as they come into interaction with other objects.
And what would be, I think, very helpful at this point is to just consider as well, as when you look at how Tez got it color coded out, there are some similarities, and then there are differences. They have behaviors, they both have behaviors. What are the behaviors that are similar? What are the behaviors that are different? And that can come into play if you're thinking in the big picture of a summative at some point. What are the similarities and differences in a pretty general statement of sound and light? You could use some of these like a card sort almost, and break them up a bit, and then use them from that perspective. Other than that, you pretty much have to break them out into specifics, I think. I don't know that we can go much.
Can I get you to go back to that same
Ab-
concept map, Chris, if you don't mind? Because what you said is important. We know that, and we'll talk about this in a bit, when we compare and contrast, we need criteria for that. And so we can use the idea of source, because we could talk about similarity or differences between sources of light and sound.
Yep.
We can talk about similarities or differences between behavior. So we'll pick those things that we could talk about, their pathways as well. So that's why these concept maps are also helpful for that reason, just to see how you can create new learning activities with the information you have in front of you.
Gotcha.
And this graphic is also available to you. There's a link that you'll have available to you on a slide deck that's going to be you'll have at your fingertips soon. We've got this is an example of the energy progression of concepts. It's helpful to know what big concepts come before your grade and what concepts come after your grade, so you can see that progression and help you focus in on certain things as you're teaching, or also looking behind the grades in front of you to help determine what things, ideas, and or not things, but ideas, knowledge and understanding that the kids should be coming into your grade with, if this was not the first year of implementation. They won't be coming in with a lot of those things necessarily because of this first year. We can move on, Chris. So besides those concepts flowing in and out and recurring and building between the grades, we also know that there are those skills and procedures. Some of those skills and procedures can also be computer science skills and procedures, which we'll see quite clearly. Computer science, which can be made to flow in and out, such as making instructions and following instructions, but also the scientific methods, specifically the skills and procedures related to investigating. Those also move in and out throughout the organizing ideas within this grade and throughout all the grades. We could see that specifically with this learner outcome, for example. They do use the word investigate in the learner outcome. And grade 2, investigate has a certain meaning. It's got a series of steps to it, which we'll take a look at a little bit later in this, or at least show you where you can find that information a little bit later in this presentation. But that's really the focus of this organizing idea, that students are investigating the behaviors of light and sound. Now, there are some other skills that do become important along the way, and that's on the next slide. Once again, you've seen this graphic before. These are all the skills, the verbs, and the procedures that students are using throughout the primary grades. These are the highest frequency used verbs in all the skills and procedure statements. And then once again, those highlighted colors mean that dark pink associated with your grade in the column grade 2 means that that verb specifically shows up in one or more of the skills and procedure statement throughout the grade 2 science program. And the light pink ones means that it's assumed that they probably should be doing that, because we know, for example, asking questions is part of investigating, and we know that investigating is a skill that is definitely mentioned in the learner outcomes and skills and procedures for grade 2. So you can see then that I've highlighted in purple verbs that show up in the skills procedure statement, and of course you can see them show up on the left. You'll notice I have one highlighted in green, and that means that it's not listed in any of the skills and procedure statement actually for energy, certainly not in this first cusp line, but you can see how it's one of those skills that is useful to be used. It would really help to deepen understanding if we can have students compare things as well. So in this particular case, well, it's not listed where students compare the sounds created by various objects. You can see how having them do that could help them deepen their understanding of the characteristics of sounds, and once they start comparing that with other objects. So we're not necessarily limited to those skills and procedures there. We want to do them. We can also add our own to deepen understanding. And when I talk about deepening understanding, I'm really referring to that teaching for transfer. And you've seen this graphic before. Again, there's those 3 phases of surface, deep, and transfer. I'm just going to want to highlight a couple things in this graphic, which you've probably seen several times before, and that is that we can move through those phases of surface deepened transfer with the individual skills and the individual concepts. So we can understand a concept at a very surface level just by memorizing its definition and restating the definition. And we could have a very deep understanding of a concept by looking at a picture or seeing something or experiencing something in our world and identifying that concept in it. For example, a concept of change, or maybe we could see interdependence, or we can see similarities and differences in things. And we transfer that through new context. The understandings are, when we start working with those, that's where, again, we're getting into the deep level already. So we're taking the surface level of those concepts, and when we have a good understanding of them, we link them together. And those are the understandings. And we learn and deepen those understandings through various contexts as well. And we're going through this because this is, again, how Chris and I are generally going to pack the organizing idea. We'll give you some surface level activities, some deep level activities, and some things that'll be helpful for transfer. Or at the end of the day, the transfer is really that final assessment that we do, or that summative assessment, to get an idea of where our students at with the knowledge, understandings, and skills. We're going to unpack this as we did with our previous organizing idea, Earth Systems, where we're going to begin with giving an example of a sample of assessment. Think, well, what would we need to teach, and what will kids need to be able to do and know in order to be successful in that assessment? And that assessment is going to align with either a learning outcome or one of the understandings if it's a larger summative assessment. With this particular organizing idea, we can see that the learning outcome is that students investigate behaviors of light and sound. That is a pretty big idea, and there's a lot in there. To sort of have one assessment, I think, is going to be difficult to get the information. The way we're looking at it is to break it down to a bunch of smaller assessments, and summatively, you have an idea of where your students are at with things. So when you take a look at that box below where it says assessment, something you can do here is just create many different mini investigations. And here's an example of one to help students to assess their understanding, not only of the understanding, but to also assess their ability to be proficient in the sub-skills of investigating. And we'll go through those later. So in this particular assessment, what students will do is just really have, they're going to determine the pathway of light by experimenting. There's going to be 3 tubes that the teacher will show and shine a light through the 3 tubes. One will be lined with black felt, one will be lined with white paper, and one of those tubes will be lined with tin foil. And then, Chris, I'm going to have you just click off further down on the prediction sheet and observation sheet. Yeah. So with this assessment, you're going to ask students, okay, I've got these 3 tubes. I would like you to predict. You see the prediction zone. How much light is going to come through that tube when it's not bent? So I'll have a flashlight at one end, and I'll shine the flashlight against me a board against a dark piece of paper. And there'll be lots of light, so they'll circle the white box, or the not so much light, which would be the gray box, or yeah, no, there's not going to be any light coming through at all. And then the question will be, well, why did you make that prediction? Once again, this is meant as a summative, so they've gone through a lot of surface level activities and deepening activities, so they should apply their understanding. What they know is that I know that light travels in a straight line from its source, so hopefully that everybody would circle the white light with their prediction, because it should go straight through. And then you'll see there's a second half there. So now you say, well, we're going to bend this, and you bend it. You make your roll to a point where you can bend it. When you put the light, it's not going to go straight through, so it's going to get stuck somewhere through the bend. And then ask students to predict, well, how much light is going to come through if I bend this and shine the light through? And you make their prediction, where it will be lots of light, a little bit of light, and no light, based on the 3 things there. And then, of course, you go through the experiment with the students, the investigation. If you go through to the next sheet, Chris, I just scroll down. You'll see, I think there's no, I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. No, on the far right-hand side, then there's room where they can record their observations with the amount of light that they see. Yeah, the right-hand column. So that's where they would record their observations after you do that. And then, of course, there's the conclusion at the end of the day, which is at the bottom. How does this investigation show that behavioral light affect its path, which is understanding 2E1. So what happened here? How does that show that that behaviors of light does affect its path? When we're talking about behaviors of light, we're talking about light going in a straight line, or the behavior of light of being reflected off shiny or smooth material. So again, this is just one example. It could be changed, it could be jigged around to whatever you need. Again, when we have an assessment like this planned, you need to know that, well, yeah, in order for students to do this, they need to know what predictions are. They're going to have to make observations. They're going to have practice those. They need to know what a conclusion is and have practice making those conclusions. And that all happens at the surface level before we would get to this activity. We also know that there's the knowledge and understanding parts about light pathways and so on that would have to be taught at the surface level as well. So yeah, we can go back to that main slide deck, Chris. And so once we have if you go back to that slide one more time, so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the planning with the end in mind. This is the assessment I'm going to do. And now we have to seriously consider then, what do the students need to know and be able to understand in order to be successful in this section of the assessment for this learner outcome. And that's where we get to that surface, deep, and transfer. And Chris is going to go through some activities that are going to help develop some of those surface and deep learnings with this organizing idea.
And it will be a lot of surface level materials. Is really just searching that out for you is kind of the first goal that I had. But further to that, we talk about or think about what we talked about at the opening piece, where we had our sort of our silos there that were connected. Same thing is true here. There's going to be some terminology that they're going to need to know from previous kindergarten and grade 1, which is going to be kind of significant in here, because when we're using the word pathway, for example, we're assuming they already have a good understanding of that, and that would have been developed already from kindergarten and then again in grade 1. So what I'd like to do is just take you through some of the kindergarten, some of the grade 1 slides. I'm not in any way suggesting that you would do all of these. Just as I'm going through and just talking about them briefly, and there are more, I just picked out sort of the bigger ones. Kind of think about, are these the ones that I don't know if my students know that terminology, or that would be one I might need to go back to first, because we want to do a little bit of pre-assessment on those terms to make sure that they're clear on them before you launch into the terminology and the teaching of the outcomes of light and sound that we have in grade 2. So from kindergarten, this is where they defined movement. So we even suggested, don't even tell them what movement is. Let's find out even in kindergarten, what do they know? So we could just say, can you show me movement? Get them up out of their seats. Can you show me movement? Don't tell me what to do. Just, can you show me movement? And see how many children actually move and can demonstrate that they understand what the word movement means. Can you show me no movement? And then from that, kind of just having that kind of conversation with them and just coming up with a definition of what movement is. Yes, it's all defined in our curriculum, but how would they describe it? How would they define it if they were going to say it to a friend? But the definition that comes from your curriculum is stated up here, and it uses the words location and position. So again, another checkpoint is, do our students in grade 2 know what the meaning of location and position is? What are the differences between them? Or would they think that they are the same thing? So location being from a starting point to a finishing point. So I started at the beginning of this ramp and I walked to the end of it, versus position where I'm upright, I'm upside down, or I'm sitting on carpet time facing you. And then I changed my position with having my back to you. So my orientation has changed. So again, so that would be another way for us to consider, what do our grade 2 students know? Do they know the differences between those terms? Keeping in mind, this is coming from kindergarten and they would not have had that exposure necessarily with the old curriculum. We then go into sort of looking at, how do animals move? How is movement? What kinds of things help us to move? So in this case, we look at animals. There's 2 different videos there. Obviously, one is in the real life. And it does a really good job of really articulating the different kinds of movement that are possible and really giving a good model for the students. So again, in the absence of just standing up and delivering and telling students that animals have 4 legs and whatever, this is again one of those ways that we can take that surface level teaching and make it through maybe a video or a story in this case. The second video gives you much the same thing, but it's in an animated form. So then we go a little bit further. We talk about the types of motion and we give them names. We don't just say this cheetah went running by and they had 4 feet. Yes, that's all true, but how did they run? Were they going in a straight line? Were they going in a zigzag line? Was it a wave line? What were they doing? Okay, so we talk about that. We look at the different ways we describe it. So up and down motion, they could go out in the playground. They could meet the teeter-totter out there and know that it's an up and down motion, straight line motion, rounded motion, depending on what kinds of things you have in the playground, etc. So again, we talk about naming the kinds of motion and that they should be able to identify animals or activities like swinging, just common everyday things that they would be able to describe that, because that's just the surface level. We want to go deeper, which means I'm going to give you a whole bunch of new examples, and maybe they're going to be completely different examples. You've never even seen the animal, you've never even been on the ride before, but you've learned enough about motion that you can look at it and predict that this is going to go around, or that you can predict it's probably just going to slide straight down or whatever. Okay, so again, one of the ideas was to go outside, depending on the time of the year that you're doing this. You could go outside with some chalk talk and they could draw some pictures of the different pathways. Couple of books that worked well for kindergarten grade 1, but again, if you need a little bit of background knowledge, they're both epic books, so you wouldn't have to purchase them. Just reading a quick story about what motion is and having some descriptors of those would be a good starting point as well. And then provided in kindergarten was 2 different slide decks that looked at motion, and they were just pictures and asked the students to identify what kind of motion they're seeing, which is already a little bit deeper now that I can describe it. Now I'm giving you new scenarios, new slides, new places that you're having to consider what you know about the different kinds of movement, and you're describing for me what they are. So those slide decks are hidden behind here. We won't go into those right now. We also talk about what helps us move. So not only do I know that I have 4 legs or 2 legs or 2 wings or whatever the case may be, so we showed them pictures again, but we even have a conversation about those legs might even look different, right? A human leg versus this leg coming from a chicken or a larger bird, and this one coming from a duck or a goose. And why are those legs looking different? Because they're coming from birds that have different kinds of habitats. Like one, definitely they can both walk on land. Definitely a goose can walk on land, or a duck, but their feet are designed to really propel them through the water. So again, depending on where you live, where your students are coming from, if they're farm students, this is a no-brainer for them. That's going to be common knowledge. If they're not, then this will be something that might be completely foreign. They may not have ever seen a chicken foot before, so they don't even know, that would look like this. So again, just having that conversation about depending on where their starting points are. And then as you're unpacking those, and if you've gone through lots of examples like that, then you're probably ready to give them a new scenario that would be a summative evaluation. So again, if you're running out of some ideas, a picture book would be a good one where you don't necessarily have to read the story, but just taking the picture out of there. Could be that you're taking a trip. Maybe you go to a farm if you live in the city. Maybe you're going to the zoo if you live in the city. And if you don't and you can't go someplace to find a new experience, why don't we just do a virtual field trip? With the powers that we have now, with our ability to just sort of surf the world, we don't necessarily have to leave the school in order to do a field trip. And this would definitely guarantee that animals would be seen by Ant children that they would never know anything about. They might see a rhinoceros and we give them a picture of a rhinoceros, or they see a rhino running, and now they have to give us some ideas about what we know about their movement, about their pathways, how they move, those types of things. From grade 1, we talk about basically how movement has 3 aspects or characteristics. In this case, it has direction, There's a pathway that could be followed in that movement. So definitely a carryover from kindergarten. And then there's different speeds. So I could even think about the video that I was showing with the cheetah. The cheetah goes by versus a turtle. Clearly, they're going to go at different speeds. So again, are these words that the students in grade 2 are familiar with? Do they know what direction means? Do they know what pathway means? Do they know what speed is? Do we need a little bit of a refresher? And maybe that's your starting point. And maybe just the video is all you need as a refresher. You don't necessarily need a lesson here. So again, what is it meant by descriptive words that we can use for direction, up, down, left, right, jumping, sitting down, those types of things. Pathways, what kind of pathway is it? Is it curved? Is it straight? How is it going to look? And so we gave them an actual picture of animals that go in different pathways. We even tied it into math and said, can you extend it a little bit and see what the next part of the pathway might look like? And then we talk about speed. So what are some descriptive words that we have for speed? So again, this might just be a review page for you and nothing more. There is a couple of books that may already exist in your schools. If you have the SAILS series in your school, then you probably have this book already, which is called The Speed Sports. And it's a great one because it provides all kinds of different examples. Again, I could use those as my models for students to give me descriptors of. There's a new experience again. Not everybody's been on a water boat, a speedboat, or racing boat, or a sailboat, or catamaran, or whatever you want to show them. Maybe you've got some skiers in class. Maybe you've got some skaters in class, hockey players, whatever. But all of those, any one of those pictures would be a new scenario for me to be commenting on, for you to show you that I'm able to start to consolidate those different components of movement and describe them to you fairly well. And they do give you lots of information about the different speeds, so we can have a little bit of a conversation about just sort of the natural wonders and what they might question and look at there. How do I go a little bit deeper? So describing the type of movement pathway through each of the following slides. So in this one, and we can go into one of these, we don't have to go into all of them, but in this one we have a slide deck. And again, it's providing you with the opportunity to just show the students, and this is a grade 1, but you could use this as your review. So where we're looking, first of all, just at direction and pathway, that they would be using that as a descriptor. So describe the direction and or the pathway of movement for each of the following. So what are we assuming? I see a car here, but I also see a train. For the most part, the train is going straight. It may have some turns in it, but that's things that we talk about, right? We can say that same thing as a road. Most roads are straight, but not always. Elevators, definitely they're up and down. Definitely they're straight. They don't all of a sudden have a curve that's thrown into them. So all of these pictures have places that we can either discuss, or you can have them go through and individually look at it, come up with what answer they're going to give, what kind of position or type of direction pathway are we seeing here? What about the ball? If I see the ball, what kind of pathway? What about the players? They would be going left, right, side to side, that kind of motion. What about if you're on a trampoline? So again, you have those different ones in the actual slide deck here. This little guy hops back and forth because it's PDF'd right now. He's going to be frozen, but what would that be a demonstration of? Well, going left and right, side by side. This one's going to be slow but steady. It's kind of how we want to do it, unless you've got some of those little green guys and they just move like crazy. Ferris wheel, or merry-go-round. Roller coasters, right? And this is an interesting roller coaster because the people are on the outside. So what kind of movement are we seeing there? And what about sort of a windmill that we could have in the summertime? This is a stairway that's going up. It's lit, but it's a stairway. So what kind of pathway are we seeing? So these are the kinds of questions that are on here that we can use, that we can ask them to identify. Is there movement here? Is the tree moving? Are the branches moving? Is the whole thing moving? Just parts of it moving? So yeah, clearly the branches are. The tree itself, probably not. And then when I look at speed, how would I describe speed? And just sort of bringing it down a little bit, just how would they describe speed in each one of these pictures? So fast here are snails that are on a racetrack of their own, not going too fast, obviously. And then the water just purposefully chosen where it flows quickly as it comes down off of those rock beds, but then it pools down here. So definitely the momentum of the water has slowed down for it to pool in that area. So you have those available. If that's all you really need to do with the students is to just do a bit of a review, then that's another piece that we can do. Okay, so then we also talk about how do they move? So what influences the movement? Obviously, the shape of something is going to change how it can or cannot move. So if I just even look at the cylinder itself, the cylinder, I can turn it on its side, I can roll it. If I'm on the end, it's not going to roll, but it definitely is going to slide a lot easier. So again, we look at how does shape influence the ability for something to move? What about the material that it's made out of? So I've got this huge rock here. I'm clearly not picking it up and just moving it off. I'm not going to push it and it's going to land in the water. So again, material, substance that it's made of is going to make a difference. How much there is, the mass it is. We've talked about mass already, so that's not a new term. And then when we talk about texture, will texture influence whether something moves easily or not? So does a smoother surface affect movement versus this textured kind of surface? And then again, ideas for students to explore. This is just a quick video on how things can move. So bouncing and sliding and rolling. And then there's another slide deck here of a bunch of different items where we would expect them to be able to identify for us how those items move. So again, we won't go into that one right now. You could again do sort of a summative at the end where I want to see how you compare items maybe on a card set, or maybe I give you a bunch of items in a bag and you pull them out and, you know, does the item slide? Does the item roll? Does the item slide and roll, right? So again, can they use sort of two hula hoops on the floor? My hula hoops are always my favorite because it gets the kids out of their seats, and it's a big Venn diagram, and it gives me space to put things if I want to use actual tools and things for them to grab out of a bag. I don't have to worry about how much space it takes up. So I've got lots of room. So again, that would be another learning opportunity. I could set those up across the room and have all different kinds of ways things can move and just pair them up differently. Every time you pair it up differently, you're going to have a new experience. So you could set up 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of sets of hula hoops in the room, and every one of them would be looking at something different. So again, it's an opportunity for them to demonstrate their learning and for you to go from there. And how does the surface that we move on affect how they move? So that might be your transfer one. So maybe this time I'm going to say, this is an activity where they learn to actually make a paper roller coaster. And how would they structure that paper roller coaster to make it go fast? How would they make it to slow down the marble if that's what you're going to give me? What might hinder it? So clearly, I probably want to fold the paper so that the folds are going in the way that I'm going to have the ball rolling as opposed to against it, right? Because then that's going to be resistant. So again, it's a smoother surface if I go in one direction versus the other. Or can they design using sort of those discovery toys? This is a favorite of ours. We have a number of these sets at our house. What can they design so that the ball starts at the top and it varies its speed, where there's places where it rolls, places where it drops, places where it's moving slower, and then it gets faster again. So it depends on how they put it together. So opportunities for them to show us hands-on what they've learned along the way. Okay, so grade 2, as you saw with your concept map, has got a lot of material in there. So really, it was more of a matter initially of just trying to find you some fast resources. So that was really my mindset. I said to Ted when we were done just getting ready for your session, I could spend another 3 days and create more slides in this just because it just seems endless. So keep that in mind. What will your goal be and how will you structure your unit? I'm not in any way suggesting that every resource that you're going to see here would be one that you would use, but hopefully it saves you a bit of legwork when you're going through and talking about it. Before we do that, let's talk about these concept attainments. I'll turn it over to Ted for a second. Did you want to go through any of these?
Well, no, we won't go through them, and the people with us today here might have been through it already. Okay. The links are there available to you, but I just want to mention one thing about them. Now, again, so Chris went through a lot of the information and knowledge that students are coming to grade 2 with on a normal year, not on an implementation year. So there's some background things to know there. Same with some of the skills and knowing what an observation is and making observations and recording observations. What is a description, how we describe are things that students also need to know to be successful in this organizing idea. And when we recall the formative or the assessment piece that I have, it's not the formative one, but the summative one, that there are some things that they're going to need to be able to know and do. And these are some things that will be important at the surface level to reach that assessment as well, besides the knowledge parts that Chris just covered and is going to also uncover for you in terms of the knowledge and understanding. And as I mentioned, the assessment that I had in place there, and you'll find probably throughout this organizing idea, the skills of investigation are going to be really helpful for the students to go through this. I won't open it now, but the steps in investigation in grade 2 are outlined in computer science, and they're asking questions, making predictions. So you can see how when we're dealing with sound and light, many ways that students can make predictions. So knowing what a good prediction is and how to make them, making good observations, and recording observations is another skill in the investigation process that they can use within the process, or they could just use as one-offs when you're demonstrating something, saying, well, look, when I do this with light, what are you observing? And have kids practice making those observations. And then, of course, basing that on those observations, looking at it carefully or analyzing it, which is the other step, and finally making conclusions based on that information. That's all part of the investigation process, which could be used as one big broad sequence of things, or working on those sub skills individually. The link that you have there is an introduction to investigating at grade 2, helps students understand what investigation is, outlines the steps, and gives introductory steps to things like predicting and concluding and analyzing and so on. So that's, if your students need that, then you may want to use that. If you've done the other organizing ideas and have done this already, then it's not surface level activity anymore. You're still deepening it with this organizing idea. So.
Yeah. So if we start off with just basically, if we're going to introduce to them sound, you could start off almost the same way that we did with movement, and you could just simply say, what is sound? Like, just get a sense of what they know and just open it up. Again, I'm presenting some of this too from my perspective, is I'm not a stand up and deliver. So I would rather do an activity, or maybe I show them a video where I don't give you any information, and I'm going to let you watch a video that I've strategically selected. And then from there, I'm going to see what you've learned from it. So we start unpacking based on maybe where I see you didn't pick up the things I hoped you would, or we're good to go. So in this case, what is sound? It goes beyond just saying what sound is. It actually will talk a little bit about how sound reaches our ears. How does sound travel through the air? So it will unpack quite a bit of information, but it's the first time through. And so they're not going to necessarily pick up on all of those pieces, and I wouldn't expect them to, but we would want them to be able to tell us at the end, so what is sound then? What is sound? If we had to describe it to somebody else and explain it to somebody who just walked into your class and wasn't in the lesson, or didn't listen to the video and doesn't know anything about it. So again, we're talking about that. We could ask them, are there things in the classroom that we could make sound with? Do you have things at home that you make sound with? Maybe they have a musical instrument they play, or somebody in their family does. So just getting that sort of that conversation happening and going with them to just to introduce it and at that surface level. Moving it one step further, so we might have had our discussion about what sound is, but now we really do need to unpack that a little bit more. So when we talk about sound and you look in your curriculum, they talk about the definition of sound. They talk about it in terms of vibrations, and they define what a vibration is. And so when things are vibrating and they start taking molecules within the earth, within the air beside them, and they interact with those molecules, some are going to go faster, some are going to go slower. And so that's how we start to generate our sound that we're going to do. And they talk about how it travels to the ear, those types of things. In the end, we also want to talk about that sound travels in a straight line. unless it hits something that's going to hinder that, which could be now we have that conversation about materials. We've already talked about materials in grade 2. We talked about the properties of materials, but we're really going to lean on that again. And we're going to be saying, you know, what did we learn about properties of materials and what kinds of materials were there? Those same terminologies are going to come right back into play here again when we talk about sound and light. So we want to introduce or maybe review that, or we could say, what do you remember about the properties of materials? And in this case, this video is just that. It looks at how do we take some of the common materials, such as just a tambourine or a drum. And in one of the examples, they'll put a couple of beans on top of the drum, and then they'll touch the drum with their hand or with a stick so that it makes the sound, but they're also seeing that the vibration of those beans is occurring at the same time. So that's an important piece for students to be able to articulate what does vibration mean and what kinds of vibrations are there. Higher and faster vibrations will give me a higher pitch that we're going to start talking about as well. So those are the components that we want them to do. So sound, where does it come from and what do we hear? What are we listening for? And how do we know that we're listening for different things?
Sound is
okay. He does an excellent job. I have to say, this gentleman is one who does a number of different series. There's another one that I have that I think is even better, but he does a great job of explaining it in very easy terms for the students to understand. So again, some of these I'm even going to suggest might be for yourself if you just want to go through them and, you know, if you just want to talk about in terms of what you have available in the classroom, just to get ideas of what they talk about in the video. It doesn't always have to be for the student as well. So then we kind of get to the meat of the matter of the sound. And this is why I say you could spend quite a few days, and you're not going to do this in one day. You're definitely going to be unpacking these over time. But when we're talking about what makes sound, the sound that we hear, we're talking about the characteristics of sound, having volume, you know, whether it's loud or quiet. So whether I'm screaming, right, we can say to the kids, how do we demonstrate volume? Pitch, whether the pitch is high or low. So if I know anything, or if you have a guitar or you have something that has a string on it, that if the string is really loose and I pluck it, it tends to vibrate, but it's not going to have the same sound than if I take that wire and I tighten it and then I try it again. It's going to bring it up because the vibration is going to be faster and a lot closer together. So we talk about pitch, and this isn't the only way that we can do pitch as well. And then duration, how long does the sound last? Does it last a long time? Does it last a short period of time? You might even say, you know, sometimes we like to go to the gym. And I always used to laugh at children when you go to the gym, they love the gym because the gym has an echo almost to them. They go in there and they all of a sudden they feel like they're in the gym. They have to start screaming, which drives me nuts, but whatever. But that's what it is they're so enthralled with hearing their voices. And why is their voice sounding so different in the gym than when we go outside? Well, because the walls in the gym are keeping my sound in there and it's bouncing off of those solid walls. We don't have to get into the physics of it, but that's a really good example for children. When they go into an area where there's a bit of an echo or a bit of a place that they can go where they hear sort of a broader sound to their voice. Whereas outside, where there's nothing for it to bounce off of, if I'm just standing in front of the school and I just have an open space, my voice gets lost pretty quickly. And if you're standing across the street and we were just talking in normal voices, they're not going to hear me because there's nothing to concentrate it and keep it in that straight line. Okay. So then we talk about vibrations. We talk about where can I get vibrations from? Like what sources could we have? So musical instruments are one. Your vocal, are talking, taking some things and hitting them, taking maybe a wooden block that's in the classroom and putting it down hard on the floor to make a sound. Different objects are going to make different sounds, and they're going to have different durations and different pitches and different volumes. So we just keep building on these, right? And as we give them lots of examples, then they should be able to start describing and bringing both the source and the characteristics together. And then we go back to what we've already learned in matter, which was the different properties of matter. And so this case, we look at texture, we look at the shape of the matter that we have or the material that we're looking at, the size of it, does that have an impact on the sound as well? The thickness of it might be another one too when we talk about that. So if I'm making a drum, for example, or I'm making a rattle, a beaded rattle, and I'm using a hide for that, depending on how thick that is, and how much I'm bunching it together and what kind of bead I put in is going to really determine what that sound is going to sound like in the end, whether it's long, high, whether it's very loud, that's going to be the other pieces. So again, there's lots of opportunities for them not only to create, but also this is a good place to tie in your Indigenous connections at the same time, because that would be a great place to do some of that. The Science of Sound unit is a great little one which talks about vibrations of particles and really brings it down to a level where students could understand it in grade 2 and what that means. This is a really one that I would say would be, there's a couple here I'm going to say are kind of must-sees. Of course, you're going to watch them first, but these would be ones that for definitely I would put in there for the students. Again, what are some pathways that sound can travel? So we know it can be a straight line. That famous, take a string and put it at the end of a cup. We've all seen that. We've all tried that as kids too. And why is it that the sound travels down that line? And why is it, what's the vibration that's happening and why do they hear it? So those, again, are pieces that we would want students to be able to have and get a sense of what that looks like. I'm just going to grab. Oh, I guess I'm not going to grab. I was going to say I had a microphone here that I was just going to grab and use, that I use a lot of times when I would teach transverse waves to students, where you can just touch both ends and students can see how the sound travels from one end to the other and how they lose the sound the more we stretch it out and the further away it is and those types of things. So those are other ways that we can do some examples of for students. There's a great little site right down in here as well. It's called DK Find Out. And this is just an example of, without getting, and this is kind of where Ted and our conversations were, is, echoes are a great example of how sound can bounce off of a surface. But without getting into the physics of it, we're not there for that, but we do want them to understand. So this was a great little model that came from here, showing that the sound comes in, hits the wall, and then reverberates back again. So we could ask them, how many of you have ever experienced an echo? Where were you when you had that echo? So that we start to connect that there has to be a hard surface for it to come back and bounce off of, so that we build that understanding for them as well. And are there places that we could take them close to you or that are available where they could create an echo, right? And have that scenario. When you click this one on, and I will go into this one just for a little bit, you will see that you have a whole bunch of these. These are just little bits of information. They're not videos, but they would need a little bit of interpretation on your part. That's not really written necessarily, not all of them, but some of them are a little bit over the heads of a grade 2 student. So, but you have pitch in here, you have volume or loudness in here. It talks a little bit about what does sound like when it goes into the water. And what do we call that for navigation? Like, why is that important? Not necessarily required in grade 2 is flying at the speed of sound, but there are going to be some students who are really into planes or that kind of an area. So that might be something that you want to bring into play or not. But this is a nice little resource. I won't bring it back up again, but when you come to the bottom of it, you'll see that there's some tabs at the bottom, and here's where you see light. This also has a connection in here for light, which we're going to reference at some point. So you'll see that there are pictures of how the light is distorted or bent. In this case, it also talks about transparency and opaque, like what can the light go through and what can't it go through, what happens when it bounces off of a surface. So there's some similarities and differences between sound and light. What are some similarities in, as far as when they hit a solid object? What happens when it's in water? What happens with sound when it's in water? So again, can't unpack everything in one shot here, but we'll give it our best. And then how does sound travel? Again, this is just through different mediums. So now it gives them an opportunity to revisit. If you don't have the tools at school where you can show them how it goes through water, how it goes through air, this is a great little video for that. So again, just a reminder, I'm not suggesting in any way that you would do all of these. It would be over the top. You just kind of need to put it into play. A little bit of fun, but again, asking them to consider what kinds of sounds, in this case, it would be volume and pitch and recognition. So we know that animals make certain sounds. We know that there are activities on a day-by-day basis that we have that make sounds. So I just put a slide desk in here for you to, it's called Guess the Sound page. Can they listen to the sound? Can they say what kind of sound it is, and can they identify it? And you can go a little bit further with that. So there's one here that's just basically sounds, and this one is a multiple choice where it will give them the sound and then 4 pictures. And so you could use one actually bit of a formative assessment if you really wanted to try that. This is just listening, and then they show them the picture of what it was. There's no talking in it. This one shows them or listens to the sound, and then there's 4 choices, and they could record which one they think is the correct choice, and it will self-score it as they go. A little bit of fun for them, but it also just makes them a little bit more in tune when they're listening to what are they listening. Watching the following video. So maybe I want to do a little bit more investigating. Remember, that's part of it. In this case, they present them with 4 investigations. They're very brief. You don't have to watch all 4. You could just watch one and stop it, and then have them look at something. But in this case, they look at 4 of them in making sound, ways that I can make sound. And then we would ask them, maybe they want to design their own device. Now, that's also a transfer or a summative that I have at the end. If you just want to do it in a short investigation where they make a prediction of they're grabbing 2 different substances or 2 different materials that they found in the classroom, and which one would make the largest sound or the longest or the highest sound or the biggest volume, whatever you're asking them to compare, they could make that prediction, and then they can check it. The only problem is that we're not measuring the intensity of sound here, so it has to be something that's manageable for grade 2. Again, if we wanted to do a little bit more of a transfer, or you want them to do a little bit of independence, explain why you might hear an echo in a cave. So we were talking about the gym. So why might I hear it in a cave, but I don't hear it in my backyard, or I don't hear it in the schoolyard, or I don't hear it wherever? Okay, so just again, a new comparison where they would have to do a little bit of their language. Just demonstrate how you can change the sound on a string instrument. So I gave you an example of, let's say, on a guitar, what that might sound like. What else? Or what other instrument would they have where they could adjust the sound and change it, where they could change the pitch of the sound? Or something else, if there's something else that they would have available. So that starts you off and gets you sort of to several different possibilities that you could start to unpack those characteristics. That important 1 page that had 3 columns on it, that's really the crux of what you're teaching over time. But as you're teaching more examples, you're bringing more of those back in and mixing them up, and what are the relationships between them. So as we move to light, much the same idea. I need to know, what is light? Of these 3 videos, they're all a little bit different because they are looking at light from 3 unique perspectives. But the most important one is this one that's in the middle. And if I only had to pick one, that would be the one I would go to. This Rami Malham is excellent. There's no fanciness in here, but he does a phenomenal job of explaining at grade level for children what it is they need to learn. So lots of good examples that maybe I couldn't provide quickly in the classroom are provided within here. So this one talks about what light is. Okay, what is light, first of all, and what would we define it as? So it's a source of energy. And then when we look in here, we're talking about the sources of light. And he really gets into, I've got a cell phone, I've got a mouse in my hand, I've got a lampshade that's going, I've got a light sitting on my side count, like just the things that children would see. So again, just a quick overview of what that looks like, very much surface level. So if you wanted to use this as your surface level, and then after that, everything becomes sort of your deeper connections that you start to make, this would be the appropriate one. And this one is just talking about what are natural and artificial sources of light. So the sun is a natural one. What's an example of an artificial one? A flashlight, right? That's not natural. It wasn't created naturally on its own. It's not self-sufficient on its own. We have to turn it on, we have to turn it off. So this just gives them, there's no words in here. It's simply musical and shows them. So you could easily pause after each picture that comes up and simply say, was this a natural or is this an artificial or man-made one? So again, another source that you can show the relationships that they've learned. So if we're talking about examples of light, this is all that this really is. It's just examples of light. Some children have never seen fireflies before. There's lots of examples that are coming up in some of the other videos. Fire is another one. Is fire a natural source of light? It could be. If it comes from lightning, it could not be if we lit the match and we started it, so it's an artificial start. So again, we have to be able to talk about what's the differences between them. The sunlight is obviously our natural. And then when we talk a little bit about electricity, again, not getting into the deep parts of it, but electricity is part of light. And how does that play a role in what happens to us? We go in the classroom and it's dark in the mornings, we turn the light switch on. Well, how's that working, right? That's an artificial light source. And that's what we do to sit in the classroom. So we have, oh, okay, and this will open for you. This is just because I've got too many things open right now. But this is how light travels. Again, anything that you need to know. So this is one of those, I would show this must do ones that I would use as a resource to deepen some of the learning that happens as light is traveling. It really does a great job of giving me everything that I need to uncover in 1.2. So if I've already done some talking about how light goes from one source to another, how light can't pass through a door, and what happens when it hits the door, what happens when it's in a sort of an endless tunnel. And Ted gave you great examples with the tube at the beginning. Phenomenal. That would be exactly what you would want to do for a summative. But these are, the terminology is encased within that one video, all from 1.2. So again, it could be your foundational one. But I would say that if I was going to use this, I would use this over a long-term period. I wouldn't show the whole thing in one day. I would break it up. I would use different activities and start to make relationships between them and then use that. So this is one that you might want to have a look at. I'm not going to go into this one. This comes from that one that we already looked at there. And again, it talks about what is transparent and opaque. Gives an example when you click it on so you can see that the light does or does not go through it, etc. Okay, so again, some sources for you if you don't have any. Okay, and then we've got some deeper understanding questions about relationships. Do you want to talk about them, Ted?
Sure, just briefly. I mentioned this earlier when I had that slide with the skills and procedures up there. It was pink and it had the columns. That, you know, there are a lot of verbs that we can use at various points in any organizing idea for different purposes. And I just want to highlight one skills and procedure statement that was it's given in the first cusp line, which reads, relate vibration to the production of sound. That whole notion of relating ideas together really helps you as a teacher when you ask those relationship questions. It gives you some really good formative feedback on knowing whether or not students understand the concepts and the ideas or not. But it also can be a good having them look at relationships and things like cause and effect really help them to deepen their own understanding. So when you give them some questions, some activities associated with it that have them make relationships, can be powerful. So I'll give you some, if students aren't familiar with relationships and what interaction means and cause and effects, in the top left right-hand corner, there's some introductory things, some concept attainment lessons you can use to introduce. And once they're familiar with cause, effect, and relationships and interactions, and once they're familiar with the concepts in this organizing idea, then you can start asking some of those deeper questions. For example, what is the relationship between pathway and object and a light? And can you demonstrate that to me? And get them some objects and have them demonstrate that to you. What is the effect when light interacts with an object that has a smooth surface? Or describe the interaction of light passing through a glass of water. So while they may seem like knowledge questions, they do need to know those concepts to be able to do that. So again, just an idea that, or just a reminder that we can bring in all these other verbs that are in that list to really help deepen understanding, and again, provide some really good formative information to you about where students are at with their understanding of the knowledge in the organizing idea.
Now, depending on how you structure your unit, you might have done different examples along the way. Any one of these questions could also become your transfer question then, right? Where you're giving me two different substances, and now I'm going to do that relationship between pathway, object, and light, for example. So again, look at these from where you've taken them and where they've already been exposed to. You can flip this not necessarily from deep, you could go right into transfer as well. Just some other ones. Again, this would be the musical instrument. So for those of you who might have taught the old grade 2, that was one of the things that they used to have students could do in designing their own objects. So this comes from Let's Talk Science. There's a little bit of unpacking if you're new to that, never did that with students before. That's a great one. I was in a school that is completely project-based. And they had grade 2s, and their task was to design their own musical instrument that played at least 2 different sounds. That was their assignment. But to get to that, after they studied all these pieces, they actually they made arrangements to interview the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, who came on with the students and talked to them about the different sounds that the different instruments in the orchestra make. And they had a few people that were there, which was really nice of them to do that with the kids, just to show them the different sounds so that they would have a sense, because some of the kids didn't even know what an orchestra was. They didn't even know what an instrument was. So they didn't know what they were going to do. But that's how they started to unpack and made some relationships between that. So that's another possibility. Just investigating materials that make a shadow puppet. Maybe they don't even know what a shadow puppet is. So what kinds of resources or materials would make the best? There's lots that would work, but which ones would make the best? And explain to me why. How do you know? What's the property of that material that makes that? So we're talking of shadows here is really what you're going to get into as well, right? So if they're talking about different materials where light doesn't pass through, it creates a shadow. And what does that shadow look like? A rainbow, that could be an extension for some of your kids that want to do a little bit of more work, where they use a prism and they see the colors on the wall, and how's that all working? Like, what's happening there, right? But it's a little bit beyond what's just the expectation. So you could use that as an extension. So just some ideas in here. Again, you've got your hula hoops. I always stand by this. This is the strongest assessment that we can do, because students can't just do 1 or 2 things. They just can't know 2 bits of information and do that. It's impossible. So it's a great way to come to summative, and you can, expand on how are sound and light the same? How are they different? I wouldn't just leave that question like that. I might give them a card sort. I might give them objects, and then they have to do some explanation that's going to happen in here to convince me how they know what's going to go where and why they put it where they did. So a powerful little thing of just getting them out of their seats. Okay, did you connect this already? Oh, you're muted. No, all good.
It's connected, but you'll have to refresh that slide.
Okay, so I will refresh this. This will be highlighted for you. So this is your slide deck. Remember that Ange Deering, one of our colleagues, is creating for you mini lessons that take computing science, specific to grade 2, specific to energy, and she builds you a slide deck with an activity and explains to you how those are to be integrated within energy, because they're not to be done as standalone organizing ideas. Computing science and scientific method should be embedded within all of these. So I'll refresh this before we PDF it and send it out to you. And then you'll have that connection there as well. Okay, there's a number of resources that we have that you'll be able to use. And because we're going to refresh it anyway, I will put some books in there as well. I didn't put a lot of them in. There will be a lot in the CPAR document. I'll talk about those in a second, but I've got a number of them that look like this. That would be great classroom additions for your school or for your library or for your own classroom. So I'll put some of those in the end as well. But when we're talking about this resource section, these are over and above. If you need some additional pieces, if you need some more information about just sound or light, then you've got some here. I'm not saying that you would have to do all of these in addition to. When we look at, whoops, there we go. This one I do want to highlight for you. This comes from Core Knowledge, and Core Knowledge allows teachers from across the world really to use their resources. And this is Exploring Light and Sound. Now, it was designed initially for grade 1, but you will find there's a lot of things in here that really are demoed in a way that's very appropriate for grade 2 as well. There is, I won't go into it, but this is what the book looks like. So there is a student resource, which you can download the whole thing or only parts of it. And there's a teacher's guide. And the teacher's guide is some 300 pages. This is not just a little leaflet. So there's a lot of information in there. So even if you don't want to use that entirely, and I'm not suggesting that you're going to just do books and whatever, there are lots of little activities, investigations at the back that are already sort of designed for you that you could easily adapt if you were doing something a little bit different. And or if you have never taught sound and light before and just need a little bit more background knowledge, then the teacher's guide you will find very, very helpful. So just again, you can check these. These are hyperlinked for you right there. So you can go in and just have a look at the books first and see what you think. And then the same thing with this one. Sound and Sea Discovery is really, really about how the movement of sound and light works, but mostly sound. And it also really is emphasizing the medium of water and how is that different when we talk about sound and how do we talk about light. They do talk about both. One goes faster through water than the other. And so we would want children to be able to explain that to us a little bit and model why they think that would be true. Does a great job of doing that. There's about 35 different links in there. Again, you wouldn't use them all, but there's definitely some that you might want to use the videos, just the pictures, not necessarily the descriptors. And the same thing, modeling sound waves. If you're looking for something that shows how the waves move because you don't have a lot of that resource in the classroom, then there would be one that you could use. This one, some of you, I know a number of schools have subscriptions to Science A to Z, so we've included this one here. This is a great activity. But if you don't have a subscription, the only way to access this is through. So you would have to go with that. Okay, and then just a couple of other ones that you have. Again, there's the Janelle one about the source for engineering. And that takes us to the end of Light and Sound. And I know it looks crazy and we don't have snow on the ground. Well, normally we do, but we won't see you again. This is our last one with you. And you are going to be sliding into that Christmas break coming not too far away. So we do thank you for joining us this whole time through and hopefully found some things here helpful for you to get started. And we do wish you a wonderful Christmas break for sure. Okay. And I'm going to stop the recording. If there's any questions at all, I'll just stop it because I know some people do not like to be recorded when they're asking a question. So just feel free.